Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next installment of the 30-minute workout webinar series. Today's topic is grading fun with feature lines. This particular topic was a request that we've had through the feedback that you've submitted. We really appreciate that. We try to, when we get a lot of comments on a subject or two, we try to present those back at a later date. So please keep the feedback coming. Had a lot of people asking for some of the basics with the feature lines and some of the grading tools contained therein. So that's what we're going to do today. My name is Alan Gilbert. I'm a technical specialist here at Autodesk, and I'm joined on the chat and the Q&A by Angel Espinosa, Jerry, and Jeff Bartles. They will take your questions throughout the presentation, so please enter those in the Q&A pane. And if we don't get to your question answer, we'll get back to you after the webinar. If you're new to this concept that we've been doing here now for about a year and a half, this is really about a short session with those need-to-know features that are not traditionally covered in your courseware training. And a lot of these things, you go to a class and you learn a workflow for a particular function, and a lot of the side tools are missed. So we love to do tips and tricks, tools that are lesser used and that could be helpful to you. Some of the ground rules, and especially today, you'll see some abstract examples. The only thing real about the project I'm using is it is my land, and I surveyed or topoed the ground. So the topo is real, but outside of that, we're going to do some fake stuff. We start and end on time. This is recorded. So you'll get a follow-up email next week that will give you a link to the recording. And again, so that Angel, Jeff, and Jerry can serve your questions, please put those in the Q&A pane. So the agenda for today, you can see we're going to do some feature line grading without the use of Civil 3D grading objects. And there were some specific requests in the feedback for that. So we're just going to look at feature lines and grading with those. And we'll start with a little pond swell basin example. Then we'll look at what we call reference surface site grading. This is a very common workflow, and many of you are probably familiar with it, but we're going to look at that in a short order. And also some corridor work, creating some grading with using a feature line in a corridor. Then we'll fill in some gaps. So we're not going to do a full site perfect, but we'll fill in show how to fill in some gaps and some outer limits. And then we'll talk about some specific tools that you can use for things like when feature lines jump across multiple surfaces. And that happens a lot. Some of the tools here, I put some of the main tools you're going to see that are in the feature line grading area. Would be the feature line from object, manual creation, stepped offset's a big one. We've got 3 main elevation editors you see there: the table view, the quick elevation edit, and then a pure elevation edit step command, I call it. And we'll talk about inserting elevation points, and then one of my favorites, setting grade through points or between a group of points. One thing we're not going to cover today due to time is the style priority. So Civil 3D site, if you're not familiar, if you have a site in Civil 3D, any feature line parcel, anything with elevation, if they cross, they will adjust to each other. So you can only have one Z per each XY, or per one XY. So if 2 feature lines cross, the last one edited will win, and its elevation will stay, and the other feature line or parcel will jump up to it. So there is some ways to circumvent that and to really use that to your advantage. And one of those is style priority. And so that's something that recommend that you research, because it's another powerful feature of the sites. So let's jump over and get out of PowerPoint. Here we go. So what I have in this drawing is a surface. As I mentioned before, this is land that I live on and topoed years ago. So I have an existing ground surface. That's really all that's here. And then I have some polyline data. This is just used to speed up the session, so you're not watching me draw polylines. So the first thing we mention is the pond or ditch or swale basin, whatever you want to call it. And so that's in the back here. And we're going to start with that using some of the feature line tools to grade this particular pond. So the first step is we need to create a feature line from this object. It's just a 2D object. So we're going to select the polyline, and we're going to go to feature line from objects on the home screen. Now here's the site. Remember, any 2 feature lines, parcels, whatever in one site will react to each other. It's not that big a deal today. I could actually go siteless for all this, but just for organization, I like using the site. So I'm going to just create this side and call it final. So that'll be the big side because the pond will be a part of the final grading for this side. So may as well go ahead and start with that now. You can name that feature line. I'll just call it pond. Give it a style if you like. I'm going to erase the polyline and I'm going to assign elevation to it immediately. So let's hit OK and we'll jump to that command, the elevation. And so what I want to do, I first want to just drop it down to the existing ground and look at elevations. I'm going to leave this set to existing ground. I'm going to grab those elevations. You can insert intermediate grade breaks. So if every location that the our feature line crosses a triangle edge, you will get another point there, and that's an awesome feature. I don't need it yet. I'm not going to use it now. And this relative elevation of surface has been out for maybe 3 or 4 years. We'll talk about that later. Very powerful feature as well. So when I hit OK, now I have a feature line, and I'm going to select it, and the contextual ribbon pops up. And I'm going to jump up here to the elevation editor. This is a table view where I can see all the elevations that it assigned to this particular feature line. So I'm looking at, okay, based on this, what elevation would I choose for this top of the pond? So I make a decision, let's say, and the great thing about this command is I can also make edits here and I can make bulk edits. So I'm going to use the shift key to select all the elevations, click on one of the fields, and I'm going to set this to 798. And notice what happens. It flattens it out. You can see the grades are all 0 to a 798 elevation. And okay. So now I have a feature line set at 798, exactly where I would like it. Now from here, if you do like grading objects, go ahead and grade as normal with the grading object tools, if that's what you'd like to do. But in this case, I'm going to just use feature lines. So one command that can help here is called the stepped offset command. So if I select the feature line, that's over on the edit geometry side. And let me move this toolbar. There we go. So here it is under edit geometry. We have the stepped offset command. And the first thing it asks me is for the distance to offset. So I'm going to start with a 4-foot offset inside. So I'm just going to type 4, enter. And it says which side, because you can go either way. I'm going to go inside. So I'm going to click inside. And then it says set based on the new elevation of the new feature line that I'm offsetting. How do you want to base that on? Well, I want to base it on grade. So I'm going to select grade from the menu, and I'm going to type in the grade that I want, which is minus 33%. Okay, so you can see the feature lines created an offset, a certain distance in grade from that original point. And the curves manage themselves. You can have very irregular shaped ponds, and it does a great job creating a shape based on that offset. Well, now let's do another offset. Let's click the next one and do a stepped offset. And the distance this time will be 5 feet. And I'm going to go inside. Same thing with the grade. I'm going to do a minus 5%. So we're going to have a flat little safety area. There we go. And then last, we'll go down to the bottom with a stepped offset. And this time we'll do 10 feet offset. Click inside for the direction. And then we'll do a minus 25% down. And we're done. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this. This is existing ground. I'm going to set this style to border only, just to get it out of the way. And now I'm just going to make a pond test. I'm just going to take a look at the surface. I'm not going to use it right now, but we can do a test surface at any time. Maybe I wanted to do volumes for this. So I'm going to select all those feature lines. And on the ribbon, we have an add to surface as break line. We don't have a surface for this, so just have the existing ground. So I'm going to hit the plus symbol to add a new surface, and we'll call this pond check. And I'm going to go ahead and set this to a style that has triangles displayed. So we hit OK and OK. Now it's asking, okay, I want to create your surface, but do you need some supplemental elevation triangle points basically along those lines? And I do, right? So I'm going to say about every 10-foot increment, I want an extra triangle point. And around the curves, I'm going to do a 10th on the mid ordinate. So this is controlling the triangulation around the curves, the arcs. So there we go. So I have a surface now. I'm going to select it, and we'll right click and go to the object viewer to just see how this looks in 3D. Looks good. Now, one thing to note, as you get more complex shapes, a lot of times you'll have issues here in the curves where you don't have enough density. And so one thing you can do here is you can create additional break lines, supplemental break lines. I'll just draw a polyline here, for example, something like that, and create a feature line from that to help control your triangle formation. So very common to need some more feature line work in here when you're not using grading objects. You may need one down the center, for example, to control your outlet side, that kind of thing. So there you go. So I'm going to go ahead and right click on the pond surface and just delete it, because we're going to create one big surface later. So now we're going to talk about grading with a reference surface. And I'm going to go up to feature line and then create feature line, manually create a feature line. And I don't have a site to use here, so I'm going to create a new site and call this reference. Okay. And what I'm doing basically is I'm going to apply grading to this side here, this parking area, but I want to use a reference surface. So what I'm going to do is build that reference surface with feature lines. I'm going to start here, and it says pick an elevation. I'm just going to pick the original ground surface. So it'll grab that elevation, go to the next point. Same thing. I'm going to say surface and hit enter to accept the elevation. Let's take a look at the elevations of that feature line. If we go to the editor. So the top where we started was 809, and we were grading down about -3. That was the natural slope there, roughly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a new tool called the Quick Elevation Editor, which is a really awesome tool. Up here under Edit Elevations has a little lightning. And notice as I highlight over a point, I can pick that particular point, and it says, hey, do you want to put an elevation here, a different one? And I'm like, yes. I want to put an 8 to 12 in, enter. And now as I move my cursor in, I can do the grade from either direction this way. So if I move my cursor this way, it's going to grade down. So I'm going to click there, and then it just asked me to put that grade in. So I'll do a -2 and then escape. Now I'm going to go back and look at the elevation editor to make sure I start with an 812 and I go grade down -2. So -2% this way. And what I would like is I would like a minus from here. I would like a flat plane across, dropping at -2 because my surface falls. So to do that, I'm going to use that stepped offset command again that we used before. So stepped offset, and I want to go through a point this time instead of a distance through this point. And what is the grade between here and here? I want a -2. And I'll stop, go check it. Pick the feature line, hit the elevation editor. We've got a -2 down here. That's what we wanted. And that looks roughly -2 from this side. So now I can go ahead and just delete that polyline for the rectangle because I don't really need it. So now what I can do is I can build this surface from these two feature lines. So just like you saw before, I'm going to select the two feature lines, add those as break lines to a new surface called ref. So I had to create a new one on the fly. This is my reference surface. I'll do triangles and contours here. And I'm not going to supplement. And there's my very simple surface for reference. And I'll go and turn that off. I don't really need to see it. And so with that said, now that I have a general grading plan for my parking area here, I can lock my parking down to it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to add this polyline down to that particular reference surface. Same thing, feature line from object. I'm going a little faster now, but I hope it makes sense. So we can put this in the final site. That's okay. Feature, we'll just call this site. And we'll hit OK. And we're going to pull it from the surface. We're not going to insert intermediate grade points here, but we do want to set it relative to that. So I want to lock it down to that reference surface, that flat plane going across. Okay. So if I look at this in the elevation editor, okay, relative to surface, and it's locked down to it at 0 location. So that's good. So now I want to basically create my side slopes around this. We have a little assembly that I've used for a corridor. So I'm just going to build that corridor quickly. And this time we'll just call it site corridor. We're going to run it down a feature line called site. And here's my assembly. Target existing ground. And we hit OK. One thing I need to bump my excuse me, need to bump my frequency up a bit. So I'm going to do 10 foot on the curves, on the tangents, and 1 foot on the curves. And I'm going to turn these off. And we'll hit OK. Rebuild the corridor. So now the corridor, again, this top feature line is sitting on that reference plane surface, and I've graded away from it using a corridor. What happens if that reference surface moves? Well, let's go take a look at that. I'm going to select the reference surface. You can't see it. I'm going to select it with a right click. We'll do an edit, raise lower, and let's add 3 foot of elevation. And we need to go and make our corridor rebuild, and we'll just set it to rebuild automatic. So now we raise this reference surface, which that top feature line was setting on. And now that our corridor is set to rebuild auto, it regrades around. Okay. So now what I want to do is build a corridor, because I need a surface, a final surface here. So we need to build a corridor surface. I'm going to select the corridor. In the ribbon, I'm going to go to corridor surfaces. And we're going to go click a new surface, and I'll call this site corridor, just to make it easy to find. And I'm going to use the feature lines. I'm going to use the daylight, which is where it touches, of course, and the hinge point, which is up at the feature line, the center line, basically, of this corridor. All right. So there's my corridor surface now. From that, you can see it's crossing too, of course, because I only went to the right side, and then it just fills the gap in. So now I'm ready to start building a final surface. So I'm going to click on this corridor surface, and I'm going to turn its display off because I know it's there. I just don't need to see it. And now we're going to create a new surface in memory, and we'll call this final. And what I'm going here is I'm going to add all these pieces together to start a final surface. I'm going to turn triangles on here. There we go. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paste in that corridor surface with a paste into final. So I'm going to right click on final, or I can click it on screen. Well, it's not displayed. So I'm going to select it here. And we're going to go up to edit surface, paste surface. And we're going to paste in the corridor surface into final. And now we're going to add these break lines from the pond to that as well. So we'll select those, add surface. We're going to put those into final. We're going to do the supplementing factors just like before. Boom. So now we're starting to build out a site surface for this entire site, right? And now we want to work on our edges, what we're doing there, or if something's happening in between. So with that said, let's look at what if I needed to put a shelf. I want to drape a feature line on existing ground and do some manual grading in between here. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to draw basically a polyline, because, and I'll show you why in just a second. And this is like, I'm drawing like outer limits or grading limits in this example. So we're going to do feature line from objects yet again, grab it, enter. And the site here again is final is great because that's where all of our real work is happening. This is not a reference or a test. And I'll call this limit, something like that, east. And now we're going to grab from surface. We're going to grab EG because this is the grading limits, basically. We're going to insert. I want to point at every triangle break. And you could do relative here. I don't really need it. But if you're worried about your existing ground changing, you could do that here. But I'm not worried. So I'm just going to hit OK. And now, just like before, I need to add that to the surface. I have a feature line now, but I don't have a surface yet. So I'm going to click on it, go to add surface to break line into final. Supplementing is great. There we go. So now let's pick on this final surface and start looking at it in Object Viewer. Okay. So you can see how that falls down towards the pond. So this is going to be a parking area, and we're going to put chairs out here so people can watch the snakes and other animals around the pond here. So it's going to be a tourist attraction. Got to tear my house down first, but there we go. So now we could keep going. Again, we could add grading limits up here and start cleaning this up on the outside. But for the last piece, I wanted to show when you're spanning multiple surfaces. So here I have this curb return. It's a great example where it's tying, it's going to tie, it's just a polyline now, but it's going to tie up to my parking area, but it, of course, moves outside to where there's no surface but existing ground. Now, if I went ahead and pasted this all into existing ground, if I was ready for that point, this wouldn't be an issue, right? It would be one surface and we're done. But let's go ahead and turn off this surface here just to get it out of the way. So now I'm just seeing the corridor and then my arc here, or curb return. So we're going to say feature line from object, just like before. Select the polyline. We're using this command a lot. And we'll call this curb, assign elevations. And then we're going to say from surface is fine. And we'll use final because final is up here, right? Final goes from the daylight all the way down the hill. So we're good there. We don't want to do relative here for sure. Okay. And the grade points, we do want intermediate grade points across that triangle. And now we have a feature line. Let's look at that in the elevation editor, our preview command we've been using. So you notice a wild elevation here, of course, because there was no surface, so it went to 0. And of course, you have a crazy grade. So we're going to use another command, and that's in the toolbox here. So I'm going to select the feature line. And there's another one called Edit Elevations right beside the Quick Elevation Editor. So this command is great for walking down like a retaining wall, anything linear that the grade is changing or elevation is changing a lot, because you go point by point. So by default, it starts with the first point in the direction it was created. And that's where I want to be. And notice it says the elevation is 0. So what elevation do I want? Well, I want existing ground. So I'm going to click surface here. And it says, do you want a different one? Yeah, sure. So we're going to pick existing. Hit OK. Now watch, I'm not going to change anything. There's my new elevation. But as I hit enter, I can walk down and do the same for every point on that feature line if needed. So awesome command. But now there's still an issue. I changed this elevation, but the grade, it didn't do anything, right? Just move that elevation up to something closer. Because if I look at this in the elevation editor, I still have some wild grade. So there is a command also, one of my favorites, and it is next to the edit elevations command called the set grade slope between points. Let's run that. So you can start from either end, and it'll highlight the point before you select it. So you get close. There's the bold triangle. I'm going to click to start. It tells me the elevation, which I could change here. But as I move my cursor down the feature line, after I got to hit enter first to accept that, as I move my cursor, it's basically asking me, okay, how many points do you want to grade between? Do you want to grade between just this point in the first vertex? Well, I wouldn't need the quick elevation command could do that. But this command's different. It lets me select as many points or the entire feature line to grade through. So I'm going to go all the way down to the end where I get the triangle and then select. And so what it's showing me is the straight grade that would be the interpolated grade from end to end. And you know what? I'm happy with that. So I'm just going to say enter. So now let's take a look at the elevation editor. Notice that good elevation at the beginning, straight grade all the way through the points that I selected. And again, what's great about that is I could have stopped halfway and graded between those half, right? I could have started at the beginning, raised it to go ahead and see what the new grade would be. So that tool is really awesome for that experimentation as you're building that grade. So back to the agenda. The goal today was to introduce you to some of the feature line grading commands and how you can use those even without grading objects to get the job done. So we looked at some of the pond type basin grading where you're just offsetting down, building those breaks. And then we talked about the reference surface where I'm basically building my plane. Remember, I did a very simple plane, but when people build parking lot grade, they set intermediate slopes in between. So they have like a back and forth, up and down to meet your grade lines through a parking area. So that same reference surface could be used that way. Instead of one simple grade, it could have multiple grades across it as it generally slopes across the site. And we also threw in the corridor just to remind you that you can create a corridor and run that down a feature line, not just an alignment. So that opens up the door to lots of really cool grading opportunities, even when it comes to parking lots and that kind of thing. I know Jeff has a YouTube video where he runs through the corridor down feature lines, creating curb and gutter. So it works great in a lot of cases. Then we looked at filling the gaps, doing the grading limits outside of your grading with feature lines, and so many different ways to do that and manipulate those. Just remember the general process we were using is throw it down to the surface, see what you have roughly, and then start from there, then start adjusting. And then we looked at, when you have feature lines that go across multiple surfaces and what you can do there. There's a lot of ways to handle that. We showed one, but hopefully that was helpful. So that is all for today. And Angel, Jeff, or Jay, were there any unanswered questions for today?
None pending.
Thank you very much, Angel. Well, with that said, we really appreciate everyone joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next 30-minute workout. Thank you.